the sky glowing red? And he's like, yep, church is on fire. So he ran to the train depot, caught the next train, and arrived back in Kaukauna at 9:28 p.m., which by that point was much too late.
Right.
The church was pretty much completely destroyed. There are photos of it after the fact, which you can't see because this is a podcast. But I describe it as looking like the bombing of Dresden.
Wow.
Which I don't know, like if that reference works for people, but like some of the walls are still standing, but it's like to the point you couldn't even do anything with them. You'd have to take them down to rebuild anyway.
Mm-hmm.
It's completely
Destroyed.
gutted, just a mess. Within a week of the fire, over $3,000 have been raised to rebuild the church. Leading the way on this was church trustee John George Fechter, who handled the collection. I'm not going to name most of the names, like I said, in this thing I wrote. Like, I'll mention more of them when I do the live version, which by the time people hear this on the podcast, I'll already have done.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, you're not really going to be all that concerned. But I will talk about John G. Fechter a little bit because he's going to be important to this story. He ran a store in town and seems to have been well off. I don't know if he was like a millionaire or anything like that, but he was doing well enough that he was often like the guy they would turn to if they needed to raise money for things, or he would invest in stuff. Not known today at all. Like, if you say the Fechter name in Kaukauna, nobody would know who you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But in the day, like, he was a pretty important guy. After the fire happened, services had to be held in a building on Wisconsin Avenue. They just kind of rented up space for a while. They encouraged people to go to the other church in town, which is St. Mary's, but specifically they wanted it. They said if you're young and healthy, go to St. Mary's. If you're old and decrepit, go to this building on Holy Cross. And the reason being is this is 1913. Pretty much nobody has a car.
So getting to the other church is probably quite a feat.
Yeah.
Is that
so? Like getting to the other side of town, having to cross the river and get around, like unless you're young, it's not going to be great.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's going to be a long walk, or you're going to have to get your horse all ready to go, that sort of thing. So they kind of try to divide it up by ages because St. Mary's could only take on so many more people as well. They were able to get the original altar from Little Chute set up in their temporary Holy Cross church area, which I think this is pretty cool because it was in 1848. This is an altar is an altar. It's just a table,
mm-hmm.
but it's pretty cool because it was the altar used by Father Vandenbroek, and Father Vandenbroek is like a major figure in the development of the Fox Cities.
Okay.
Because he's the guy who gets like 3 boatloads of Dutch people and said, no, that's what it was. 3 boatloads of Dutch people. And he says, hey, I need Dutch people to come to Little Chute. So he loads up Dutch people and he brings them to Little Chute.
Okay.
And today, like almost all the Dutch people in Little Chute are descendants of these 3 boatloads of Dutch people.
That's incredible.
That Father Vandenbroek brought there. So like when they came and they set up their church, like this is his original altar. So I think that's cool they still had that around. You know, again, I'm not like terribly religious, but like even from a historical point of view, like that's a cool artifact to have.
Mm-hmm.
They continue raising money. It goes pretty well. They get various plans together of what they can do to rebuild. They get some money together. They get some plans together. They end up going to an architect in Milwaukee named Erhard Brielmeier, and he was a pretty big deal. He had made plans for churches in nearly every state in the Union and every province in Canada.
Wow.
Yeah. So unless you're like super into architecture, you've never heard the name Erhard Brielmeier.
But if you're super into architecture, he's probably a pretty big deal.
He was a pretty big deal. This guy was primarily known for building churches. So like if you find churches that were built around this time, like 1900 to 1920, there's a fairly good chance that he was somehow involved.
Interesting.
He was like the guy. Bricks are moved in even before the building is like approved because they feel like if they get the bricks right away, they'll save money later. I don't know logistics of that, but they did it. Again, plans are laid out. They send the original bell back to Cincinnati. The bell during the fire had fallen to the ground, cracked, smashed, wasn't any good. But they sent it back to Cincinnati, to the foundry there, and they had a new bell cast out of the old bell.
Okay.
So that's kind of neat. So as far as I know, the bell that's in Holy Cross today
is that recast
bell, which in itself is the original bell, sort of.
I mean, it's a recast of the original bell, so
yeah.
But
so depending on how you feel, whether that's the same bell or not, but that's kind of neat that they are able to take the bell and make the bell out of the bell.
Yeah.
So if nothing else, that's bell's debatably original. Bidding went out for the project. The most they could spend on it was $40,000, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's pretty good money in those days. Winning the bid was John Coppice. And John Coppice is an interesting guy because at the same time, he also happens to be the mayor of Kaukauna, but he is primarily known as a contractor.
Okay.
So like this isn't like a corruption thing. Like he really would have been a good guy for the job. And if you knew churches that were being built around this time, not only is this guy in Milwaukee, there's a good chance he's the architect, there's a good chance that John Coppice was the guy who actually did the physical building. Because on top of rebuilding Holy Cross, he's the guy who built St. Mary's in Kaukauna, St. Francis in Hollandtown. He built a church in Kiel. So this guy's getting around building churches in the area. So kind of neat to know that the mayor of Kaukauna was also like the guy who built the churches in the Fox Cities area. The cornerstone is laid in June 1914, so the following summer from the fire. People from all over are coming. All the different priests, all the people from Catholic organizations. The local bishop was there. Giving the main speech was a man named Reverend Ricklin from Green Bay. And this guy is an interesting guy, this Father Ricklin.
Okay.
So he had originally been growing up on the border between France and Germany. At a time where Germany was kind of like taking over surrounding areas. This is a whole other thing, but like Germany as we know it today exists from 1870. This is the time when all the different German areas, Prussia, Bavaria, so on, all kind of came together and became Germany.
Okay.
And in the process, there was this big, huge political fight between the government of Germany and the Catholic Church. And the government of Germany was run by Otto von Bismarck, you might have heard of Bismarck, pretty big name. He was Prussian, he was Lutheran, and he liked the idea of Germany being Lutheran. But when he started combining these new areas into what would become Germany, some of the new areas he combined were heavily Catholic.
Okay.
At that point in time, the Catholic Church was very serious about how things would be run in areas that were predominantly Catholic. Being the Pope meant something. So Bismarck did not like the idea that the Pope, I mean, he wasn't personally doing it, but like he was overseeing all these schools and all these areas and things like that. And Father Ricklin, who's growing up in this area, he runs a newspaper that's a Catholic newspaper in an area that's now about to become Germany.
Okay.
And Bismarck doesn't like the fact that he has his newspaper that's writing these very